Hi, and welcome to Making Music at Masterdisk, where we discover the art and science of music production. I'm Scott Hull, and today we're in the studio with my co-host, KJ, and our pals and clients and longtime friends, JMI Recordings. To my right, we've got Steve Bandel.
Hello.
And Jay Cohn.
Hi there.
Together, they make up JMI Recording and have been a part of my mastering world for a number of years now. I'll highlight briefly a few of the projects that we've worked on together are shown on the album jackets behind us, but this is just an opportunity for us to get to know JMI a little bit and then talk very specifically about a challenging project that we had more recently. But I'd like to kick it off with just it's a pop world, digital pop world these days. What brought you to, what made you guys think, yeah, let's make all analog vinyl? That's going to be cool. Where did that come from?
Well, first of all, we've been working together with you for what, 6 or 7 years?
7 years.
Wow.
And you don't know anything about us. So that's a little disheartening to
start.
I'm just kidding. I know you know about us. So the amazing thing is that when we started the record label, I had been the one with all the analog experience, having worked at Electric Lady Studios starting there in '96, worked there for about 8 years, actually witnessed the transition from analog to digital during those years. But I was known as the analog lover. And when he proposed starting the jazz label, he was the one insisting that it be all analog. So I'm going to kick it to him for the rest of the answer, really.
Cool.
Well, I really came at it from a consumer's point of view. Steve and I had been involved in a label back in the early 2000s called Brown Brothers with a lot of the similar sort of motivations, but without the analog part. And for reasons having nothing to do with Sonics or anything, we had to sort of mothball that label for a while. And then Steve went on an epic record collecting and buying splurge. So between about, I'd say 2013 and 2016, he amassed this incredible collection of labels like CTI, ECM, Milestone Records, Muse Records, Japo, and just a bunch of 60s and 70s stuff, which he curated with impeccable taste. And we had been music addicts before, but this concentrated experience of listening to this particular group of records that he collected, and there were hundreds, between 13 and 16, shifted something in me, and I think in him, to the extent where when he was done, basically because his finances and his energy to curate this kind of stuff had run out, we were looking for an experience to replace that. We had both had an experience in starting and enjoying the parts we did with our prior label. So I said to him, let's make some new records like this so that people like us can appreciate this kind of experience after it's worn out, whatever group of records that we have from 50s, 60s, 70s. And then it sort of evolved naturally into how were those records made? And obviously they were all made analog.
Yeah, there's a lot of similarities I see with your releases, but also some interesting eclectic tastes and things that you wouldn't necessarily expect to find. I mean, if it were me, I would just be whatever I think sounds cool. Is that your leading factor here, or what helps you choose a record?
Well,
or choose an artist to work with?
Well, we've continued to evolve since those years that he's talking about, and since we started the label, our tastes have continued to evolve, continue to discover more types of jazz and more extended branches of jazz. And plus, we don't really come from a jazz background originally. Originally, the both of us are rock, I think, would be the main genre that we grew up listening to, and pop. And so, we got into jazz relatively early on, probably in our college years, I would guess would be the beginning of it. But as the labels continue to become bigger, we've decided to try a couple of things here that are, I think, thematically still in the JMI world and technically in the jazz world, I believe, but definitely branching off to other types of things like the Katrina Sturton record and the Doyle Bramhall, DJ Harrison
record.
Yeah,
both are really interesting. The Katrina was it's like the limitations of all analog, the limitations of capturing it live in the studio are sometimes a really great impetus for capturing music that just is so raw that it really grabs you.
Yeah, certain projects really fit the analog thing well. Certain projects really fit the live to 2-track thing well that we're trying to do a lot of. And the Katrina Sturton record was so challenging. You know, you forget how challenging it is to record and mix and master and edit if you have to, stuff that's purely analog.
Yeah.
And just mixing that one song, We Bloom at Night, we didn't even have automation on the console that we were using to mix it. So it was me and James Yost, really old school, both of us, as you're printing the final mix, muting stuff, changing levels.
Wow.
So that's when you realize, like, you know, first of all, what did he force me into here? And second of all, like, wow, this is what they had to deal with back in 1960 or whatever.
Yeah, yeah. I'm personally kind of fascinated by that whole thing, the live to 2-track, especially the room we're in is a room I put together really to do that and bring that to maybe a different sort of audience, not necessarily a jazz audience, but maybe a singer-songwriter kind of thing, a smaller group, duos and trios, and things that certainly some jazz, but certainly some other things as well that would normally be multi-tracked. And
yeah, we're about to do a trio to straight to half inch in August, drums, bass, and sax.
Correct.
And we haven't attempted that yet. We've done solo stuff straight to half inch. We've done duo stuff straight to half inch, but we've never done anything larger than that. Yeah. So we need to ask you some questions about that. But like here, you're able to do that obviously, straight to half inch.
Well, it's about being in a big room, capturing mostly the sound of the room, not getting to when we do drums and guitar or drums with, you know, in guitar and vocal, we don't put a lot of mics on the drums. We're really trusting and using the musicians to balance themselves in the room.
That's what we were discussing, is that when we get in there, we really have to talk to them and say, look, you have to create your own dynamics here. Like, we're going to get a general sound when you're here on the mic, we're going to have the perfect sound. So stay there when you're going to solo, come up when you're not going to step back literally.
Yeah, there's a buddy, and I call this the sort of the bluegrass technique, where they would just stand around one microphone that have like a 5-piece or 6-piece acoustic guitar, bass, mandolin, fiddle, and they'd all lean in for their line and pull back out again, and then the vocalist would step up, and it was a RCA ribbon or something like that they would be around, but they got to know how that mic heard the music. And so they did a bunch of takes, obviously practicing these techniques, and they'd listen to it. It's like, oh, I came in too close on that one, or it's like, you know, Jamie on the bass, you got to play, you got to dig harder to be heard. You would have to, you know.
Right. So what we were planning on doing is giving them headphones, and giving them the mix that's going to tape, and then they can hear.
As long as there's
live.
Plenty of room in that sound to go with that. You know, like, in other words, as long as their headphones also include the room mics, then they'll be able to interact with each other, you know, in a good way. So they'll have their direct mic so that they can tell their balances and stuff. But I find you can almost forget to have the headphones on if you've got a room mic up feeding it as well.
I need them to hear the exact mix.
Right.
The full mix,
right.
Whatever's going to tape, so that they know exactly what it sounds like.
Yeah, so they'll be producing it. You know, producing their part for you. Yeah, that's.
Is that a fairly smooth process? Is it difficult for the musicians, especially modern musicians, to keep that in mind during the recording process?
Probably, yeah, because, you know, 99% of the time people are recording digitally, where you can pretty much do whatever the heck you want and fix it in the mix, kind of thing.
So how do you break in an artist to this experience?
Look them dead in the eyes, let them know you're serious about this. And that tape is expensive. Basically.
They probably get it after about a half an hour.
Yeah.
It's like, oh yeah, you mean you can't fix it in Pro Tools?
Yeah. You let them know the truth about what you're doing, you know, the finality of it beforehand. And then, you know, experiment a little bit before you start rolling. Yeah. And try make sure you're right. That's just really, you know, I'm explaining to him, because now he wants to do everything on half-inch tape, because it saves us so much time and money and mix sessions, and it's more old school, you know, because that's the way they had to do it before. Yeah. 24 track or 8 track or whatever.
Well, that's on that point a little bit more. you know, it would seem like it takes longer, you've got to do more preparation and all, but what parts of the process do you save? Where do you save the time and money for the listener's benefit?
Well, I mean, there's two parts to that question. The first, as with most things, I'm coming at from a non-technical point of view, and in my experience, a lot of albums which were recorded that way by necessity, because that was the existing technology, it didn't matter how big the band is, it didn't matter what genre it is. If it was a good recording, there's an immediacy and a power to those recordings that I find you don't get with later recordings. Now, it has to be done right, it has to be the right mix of material and technology, but that's sort of what I'm going for. So it is a cost thing, which is the subject of your question, but it's also an aesthetic choice. And I'm not saying I want to do every release like that, but in general, that's my default position with what I'll call a more traditional jazz record.
Right.
And as far as the cost is concerned,
it really limits you though, no overdubs. You know, you have to explain that to the artist,
Sure.
you know. So it has to be like you
that's a
said.
big
Well,
pill to swallow.
solos in place. I mean, you're cutting the solos live.
Yeah,
you know.
but I'm saying you can't overdub anything else,
Right.
and certainly
Don't
not
screw it up.
certainly not vocals or anything like that. So we're constantly just debating, should this project be half-inch, should this be 2-inch, and and we
But it's
didn't
always
even
but for you, it's always analog.
It's always analog,
Yeah.
but until relatively recently, we weren't even considering doing stuff straight to half-inch. It wasn't really on our radar because we have the technology to do it 24 tracks. So of course you have all those advantages, but then you start realizing the disadvantages of having that many tracks and having to mix and having to do all this extra things.
All the options.
And the
that
heavy
enslave you.
tapes, the heavy 2-inch tapes. I thought I was done with those in '96, '98, or whatever it was.
Yeah, when they came into the mastering sessions with their entire everything on a DAT tape that was only about this big.
Yeah.
You know.
but it's also part of like the whole label's aesthetic in a way is to maximize the humanity. I mean, I described to you what was the initial impetus behind the all analog. We wanted to replicate the process of the labels we love. But as we've gone deeper and deeper into it and had to think about it, because you get confronted by the practical limitations and costs, you really have to start thinking more deeply about it. I think we've become a label that's mostly about, in all ways, and analog is an initial and very important part of it, sort of like a sculptor, carving away what's not necessary. And there's, we don't want to be, Luddites about it. We want to make the best recordings we can, but what's our idea of the best recording? I think Steve and I in general, unless it's a project like the Plum project with Questlove, where the whole vibe of the thing is going to involve overdubs and it's going to involve stuff done in mixing, which is in concept part of the project. Our default position is, and mine certainly more and more extremely, is do it as simply and with little need for additional technical work as possible. Now, just to get back to your other question, when we do a multi-track session like the Questlove session,
Sure.
the cost really comes from when Steve and Ben Kane, our excellent engineer who mixed that album, start to get bogged down in certain sounds, and those mix sessions can stretch a long time. And that's where the real cost comes in, in addition to the fact that the 2-inch tape is double the price.
Do you guys ever have to convince an artist that this format is going to work for them, or do they come willingly on this adventure with you guys?
Well, on a solo project, it's not too hard. When it's just one person playing one instrument, it's not too hard to convince them that we only need 2 tracks. And it wasn't hard. We didn't have to talk the duo guys into it, but as we continue to expand, larger ensembles going straight to half-inch tape, we may need to, we may get some pushback at some point from somebody like, no, I want to do overdubs at some point, or this is not what I imagined. So.
And who wins those arguments, or is it a give and take? You do, right?
I win.
Yes, of course.
Well, I mean, Steve is very careful. He's an expert, and he won't like me saying this or anything other complimentary in nature about him. But the truth is, it's a great question, but he's made it so that if there's any doubt that the artist is going to be receptive or that the project isn't right, he'll he'll win an argument with me. He won't go to the artist like, he's right, more and more, we're going to try and do this, but he's still pushing back with his knowledge of the technical limitations to make sure we're not even going to try it unless it's going to come out right.
I can even double down on that for Steve's benefit. Is he knows what he's looking for. He knows when it's right. And when we're working on the details in a mastering session or in the cutting, it's just like, yeah, no, not quite. Yeah.
I mean,
it's a good imitation.
I think we all have that. I mean, you have that. I know you have that too.
Some of the biggest names I've worked with had that thing going on, and they're also patient. It was one of the things that you guys bring to it. Is like, it's a financial decision, but if the product isn't amazing, then what are you doing with the thing? So being patient enough to let the process work through and find the solutions. I mean, I'll just go on for a moment about what we do collectively for your pressings. That when JMI project gets cut here and sent out for pressing, the test pressings come back to Masterdisk, and we go through them with a fine-tooth comb, and we have to approve them first before they even go to you guys for your final sign-off. And that's not a simple detail, because the pressings these days aren't like pressings were back in the in the 60s and 70s. It takes a lot of effort to get the plants to kind of understand just how good you want it to sound. And so Masterdisk is very proud of these releases as well, because it expresses some of the best work we can do as well.
Yeah, and like you said, an insistence on, especially for this type of music, and for the people that are buying this type of music, a lot of them are audiophiles. A lot of them expect a perfect record, or as close to perfect as possible, being completely analog. But and you said that the test pressing process is not a simple part of the process. We found it to be the least simple part of the process, and that's why we dumped it on you.
Well, it's a series of compromises. It's because we never can really get perfect. I don't know if the rest of you feel this way, but sometimes it's easier to manage somebody else's situation than manage your own. So it's like easier for me to say, no, Steve's not going to like that.
But it also,
because I know him well enough to be able to say that to a client, to a pressing plant, which I had to this morning, by the way.
Yeah, good.
It also
let them know.
Points up what an important part of our label you are. I mean, you've mastered every one of these records, but more than that, from day one till today, you've engaged in this, white whale chasing like project of teaching us where we need to adjust our expectations, how we need to calculate them. And, I don't know your experience with other clients you have, but the fact is that this label is very much about your imprint as much as mine and Steve's, not only because of your technical knowledge, but because of your memory about how this process should work when it's working right, and what are the diminution in sort of available resources now that cause you, I mean, it's soup to nuts. I mean, I'm not saying this to you viewers and you listeners to come use Scott Hull as a master. I'm saying if you like JMI, you like Scott Hull's work, because without you, it's a much different label.
Wow.
I'm curious, Jay, you just said a minute ago that you were counting on Scott to sort of show you where the boundaries are in certain places. Are there any boundaries that have come up that surprised you?
Oh yeah, I mean, and by the way, I didn't say I was counting. We've come to count on him, but like, it's funny because we've been doing this now 7 years and with an increased frequency, and yet I still feel like he's teaching us more now. Like, our learning curve has gotten steeper for him because we're deeper and there's innumerable things. But yes, I mean, we've been shocked and stupidly wrong about stuff as basic as, I don't even want to mention it because it's embarrassing, to more nuanced stuff.
What did you say, Steve?
I said mention it. We were talking the other night when we first started working with Scott. He was sending us lacquers after you master something. Do a cut. He would give us a test lacquer, and we would go home and listen to it as if it were a test pressing. And so we were contacting him like, we hear ticks and pops, we hear surface noise, we hear such and such. It had nothing to do. Lacquer is meant for you to listen to like the sonics of it, make sure that's right, and other things.
The levels,
too.
right?
Yeah.
But then when you get the test pressing, that's when you're like, wait a second, I hear a click or a pop here or there that's consistent on the other test pressings. Then you got an issue. But but we were calling him like, "What's going on with you, buddy? You know, this lacquer's, you know, I hear a click here and a pop there," and he's like, "These guys don't even know what the hell they're listening to."
How many turntables has it been played on?
Yeah,
Who
he's like, "What are you
handled
listening
it?
on?"
You know, is the turntable lined up? All the stuff that the
So the
podcast
first album I
listeners have
gave
heard.
you hell, I'm sure, because we didn't know what we were doing, you know.
Oh
so.
no, it's that's the funny thing. These days, almost no one knows what they're doing with vinyl. Was fortunate enough to start mastering before digital, just a few years prior to digital. And like you at Electric Lady, saw the transition from analog mastering process to a digital one, where they were simultaneous for a while, and then vinyl was almost entirely phased out. I mean, Masterdisk at that time had 4 record lathes and a DMM lathe in 5 different mastering studios. And,
wow.
I saved one. The good one, is the one that we still use. But, 15 years ago, this was, people were talking about the vinyl resurgence, but not that many people really believed it was going to stick around like this. And it's not a resurgence anymore, it's a lifestyle.
Yeah, but the one thing people don't talk about, because almost no one cares, and I always say this hoping that someone will correct me, we're the only ones making new all analog recordings for vinyl. So like the vinyl resurgence is putting everything on vinyl. But if you believe, like we do, that if there's digital signal input, you're starting off. I'm sure, look, Rudy Van Gelder preferred digital at the time, and I don't know how he viewed that as with vinyl, but the point of vinyl to me is that nothing's been converted to binary code. Like, that's why you endure the pops and hisses and stuff, because you're getting the maximum humanity. That's the only, because there's been no evolution after the 33 or 45, like as far as an all analog process. So you're getting that, I forgot where I started.
I was going to kick it over to KJ, because we had a conversation years ago and your revelation into vinyl, and like why, because you went from being skeptical to being not skeptical.
I was absolutely skeptical. A very, very close friend of mine, an actor named Otto Isando, sort of just stumbled into becoming an audiophile and introduced me to the world of records, and I've been addicted, just flat out addicted ever since. And it's, in addition to the sound and the humanities, I think you put it very, very well, there's also this this tactile nature to it. There's the sort of the business of getting up after 25 minutes and flipping the record. There's a discussion that Scott and I had the other day, was the idea of listening to an entire album from start to finish, which is kind of a lost art these days. And the idea of allowing an artist to tell you a 20 to 50 minute story instead of a 3.5 minute story is, to me, is just fascinating as an artist and as a listener. Does that play into the sort of conceptual nature of JMI?
Oh yeah, all of that stuff does. I mean, it's definitely, we consider it a different listening experience than Spotify or, being in a car. Mm-hmm. We still haven't figured out how to get turntables in cars, by the way. If you can,
it could be done. It just
maybe a van, something with some
it's quite the suspension system. You were staying away from digital product for a while, and then decided that you needed to. And what was behind that decision? I suspect I know the reason, but
It wasn't exactly, it's an easy mistake to make. It wasn't exactly we were staying away from it, it's that neither one of us cared at all about it. Mm-hmm. So the initial sort of entree was twofold. One, the people we were...
I mean, first of all, it's not that we don't care about it. So much, 75% of my career has been making music digitally. Not with JMI, I'm saying, but we're not...
No, but we didn't care about producing digital recordings.
For JMI... it just wasn't. You're gonna spend all this time and money, and so you might as well do it the right way. Digital. When it comes to jazz, at least in my mind, for this record label, digital feels like cheating. Pro Tools feels like cheating. Yeah. But for other kinds of music, you need digital. You love digital. Sure. It does. Sure. There's no issues with it. There's no negative connotation to it.
No, it seemed like it would pretty obviously it was a necessary element to attract people to the label, so you can hear who these players were and things, and then maybe get curious about, well, what's the real version sound like? That's right.
And as well, at some point when you're getting more prolific, you come closer and closer to the question of, is presenting the music, even in a format you consider to be inferior, better than all the people who don't own turntables not having any access to it? And obviously the answer is yes, and there's 8 zillion other more prosaic concerns, but it's our digital output growing is a consequence of our success with the analog and sort of prestige we're bringing to the label.
Right. And so everything is available on streaming as well. JMI releases?
As of this or next week, everything will be current, with digital masters.
And was that decision a struggle for you guys at all?
I mean, at first we were, like you said, we didn't care about that aspect of things with regards to JMI, and we were kind of maybe getting a little cheap thrill out of not posting it online, saying you have to buy the record, you know. And actually, the guy we made our first record with, Steve Wilson, also got a huge kick out of that and says at his concerts, this is not available digitally, you have to buy the record. So there's a little thing to that, but then we're caving in, really, but just for our own benefit. We want, as we grow and people might be researching us, we don't want them to go look for us and there's nothing there, you know, for them. So,
and do you know if streaming leads to vinyl sales for you guys?
I don't know about that, but
nothing leads to vinyl sales. I mean, you know, like when I said we're sort of victims of our own success in the digital world, we got a distributor for we were looking for a long time, just in case we hit on something that everyone in the public wants and we can't mail out the records one at a time fast enough. We worked very hard and we got a company that got us distribution in brick and mortar. They also agreed to do our digital distribution, so we had that asset. It's kind of a no-brainer for us now. We just give all that stuff to them.
In following up with, you forgot what you were saying earlier, which is, you know, this whole kind of thing of, well, what's the whole point of making something digital and then putting it on vinyl? It's kind of like false advertising in a sense, is what he's trying to say. And he's maybe correct in saying that we're the only people that are doing new releases that are all analog. I don't see how that could possibly be true in the entire world. I doubt it is.
It's a small group. You're not alone, but it's a real small group.
But
because it's so dang hard.
Right.
Expensive.
But with regards to like people who are putting out, like Blue Note, for example, your tone poet is putting out things that's all analog.
Yeah, but it's from 60 years ago.
Correct. But it's still all analog, and it's going straight to vinyl. And so he's saying that that's kind of, if you're going to buy new vinyl, buy something that came from the original analog master tapes, never got digitally processed, and then you got something where it's like, okay, there's a real reason why I'm listening to this on vinyl. Of course, you don't have to be so picky and just say, you know, I'm listening to this on vinyl because I fucking feel like it.
Right.
You know? I recently made a record. You weren't involved in it, but it was a record I had recorded both analog and digitally about 20 years ago at Electric Lady. Decided to put it out on vinyl just because I wanted a copy on. I just wanted to see it on vinyl, wanted to exist on a vinyl record, but it had digital signal. It wasn't a JMI thing, so I had the freedom to do whatever I want. And I put it on vinyl, and yeah, sometimes I look at it and I say, yeah, it's not a completely analog thing, but you know, all records don't have to be all analog. So,
no,
you know,
indeed, absolutely.
all vinyl records. I mean.
So I wanted to comment, I walked in here into the studio today and Scott smiled at me, walked over and hit play, and fucking blew my mind. Playing on those speakers down there on the left channel,
oh, hard pan.
The craziest drum kit sound I've ever heard live, the snare jumping down my throat.
Yeah, this channel's reversed. I knew you. I told you.
Oh, is it supposed to be on the right
That's
side?
supposed to be on the right side.
Yeah, I caught that. And then on the left, this gorgeous, you know, the gorgeous bass sound, like, you know, all the, you know, the harmonics jumping off the, you know, the round strings as they hit the frets, and you know, my mouth was open, and I'm, you know, so I understand this is your latest project. This is the thing you guys are doing together now. I got to know about the origin and just how you created this beautiful sound and where you found the courage to do something as crazy as just hard panning these things.
Well, there's a long history in jazz of panning, and maybe some hard panning as well. Like I've heard Miles Davis records, for example, where Miles is all the way on the left side, and maybe something else is all the way on the right side, and then a couple of the other instruments are stereo or whatever. And for years, I hated it. I'm like, it's Miles Davis. Why is he only coming out of one speaker? This is criminal. And then slowly, you know, as your tastes continue to evolve over the years, and things you used to not like onions, suddenly you want on everything. And so then I more recently heard this album on Japo Records, a label he mentioned earlier, an album called System Tandem. It's the name of the album and the duo, I guess. I can't pronounce the two people's names. And I don't think it's hard pan, but it's guitar, and the other guy plays like flute or something, and they're in, you know, they're like basically in two separate speakers. Guitar players in here, flute players over there. And it's just the wildest, one of the wildest things I ever heard on vinyl or at all. And, you know, I heard it many years ago when I first bought it, and it made a big impression on me. I was telling people about the record. I was buying the record for people. And then years went by, and then we do a radio show about jazz labels on WKCR about once a month, and we're coming up on this show about Japo, this German label. And so I was reviewing the records, and I heard this record again. I said, oh my God, it hit me the same way, like 5, 6 years apart, where I was like, what the heck? And so that's in conjunction with the fact that we've been talking about, were we even talking about this maybe before I heard that record again? And it was a record that sort of said, like,
your answer's not right. What happened was,
tell me before I say that. So go on for 10 minutes.
You know what? I knew it was a good story, but what happened was we've been working with this drummer, Mike Mitchell, and
I was getting to this.
And this goes back to a question you asked for: how do we get musicians? Because Steve also gave a great answer, which wasn't correct. I mean, it was correct, but there's basically 3 ways we get musicians. Number one, a young musician who Steve and we don't have many overlaps on young people because he doesn't do as much, you know, he's into listening to older people. I'm also too, but my point is, once in a while a young musician will come along and me and Steve will see him or hear him and be like, yes. And then so that person goes on our list as someone we want to work with. Or we have access to a bunch of musicians because of Steve's profile in the music business, or it will be someone who's into our label, which is happening more and more, who we happen to like. So that's basically the 3 ways that we get our artists. And with respect to the album you asked about, an album called Hard Pan, there's this guy, Mike Mitchell, he also goes by the name Black Dynamite, who we had a young A&R guy who was working for us for a little while. He took Steve and I to see a show, and our mouths dropped open. I mean, you hear the way he plays, it's like lighting a fuse, and then the dynamite goes off for however long he wants to be playing. But it's also very tuneful. And his buddy that he grew up with, who's accustomed himself to playing fast and precise with him, is this bass player named Max Girl. So when we were planning on doing an album with them, I wanted to highlight how great musicians they are individually and hope that it hung together. So like, again, I'm always coming from the non-technical point of view. I said, can we just put one guy in one speaker, one guy in? That's how the idea came around. And of course, as usual, Steve said, no, that's not going to be easy or good.
I voted that off the island just as soon as I heard about the idea. There are huge technical problems with turning 2 independent mono sources into a groove that goes back and forth and modulates in itself. The biggest and the simplest way to describe it is when something happens only on one channel, that causes the depth of the groove to change. So you know, boom out of a bass on the one side causes it's not, the groove walls don't necessarily move like speakers. They move in conjunction. And so they go back and forth when the audio is in mono, and when audio is different from between the channels, it gets narrower and deeper. And we have limitations. We start with a 2 mil groove. The groove can't be 0 mils wide. If we have to maintain some groove there for the needle to stay tracking. And we can't go out, you know, to 14 mil groove to make this gigantic deep groove. We have to stay within the 4 or 5 mil groove as a maximum. So the trick is to cut this without causing the music to suffer. Because it's almost easy to cut it from the standpoint of like, well, it's mono the bass. You know, we talked about this, but if we mono the bass and we pull the high frequencies, you know, towards the center and kind of turn this into a sort of soft pan record, it'd be a lot easier to cut. But you kept challenging me to like, no, that's the whole point. This thing's got to be, it's got to be hard left and right. And again, I said it couldn't be done because it just isn't done. The reason why you don't see too many of these things on vinyl is it's that particularly difficult. So the process was literally a bunch of test cuts. Like, well, that doesn't work. Okay, we'll try something else. And test cuts again. Well, that doesn't work. And then it kind of came to the conclusion that if we reduce the level a little bit and we control the dynamic just a little bit, with independent channel limiters so that neither channel gets too crazy, we're able to get it onto vinyl and make it sound good.
So, but the fact that it was drums and bass made it even more difficult rather than piano and trumpet or something.
It's the low frequency out of phaseness that's the critical component here. That's what.
And speak in layman's terms, though, that for you mastering, that makes the stylist that's writing the grooves in the lathe jump around too much for it to be accurate.
Well, there's two things. It causes the groove to change too quickly, which will kind of, if a big left channel excursion comes along, the needle will actually jump into an adjacent groove. But also, it will cause the cutter head to dig too deep and run a risk of bottoming out on the aluminum plate underneath the lacquer, or conversely coming out and being too shallow and causing the groove to lift out.
So when you were limiting each channel individually, how did you do that without compromising the dynamics?
The same mastering compressor / limiter that we would have used, in the 70s. NTP program compressor is part of my rig in the console, and as it turned out, it was more effective than I, had really given it credit for, because I'm always sending it composite stereo. But sending individual left and right channels and having each one of them work, because it's a dual mono compressor, having each one of them work separately on it, I didn't have to take a whole lot off. It just allowed me to control the loudest attacks, but in a pretty creative, in a way not dissimilar to what's going on when you print the thing to tape. There's a little bit of a transient smoothing and a little bit of warming sound that happens. It's not a compression in the sort of like pop mastering kind of, or limiting or clipping kind of thing. Yeah. This was just, I couldn't have gone in and adjusted the levels precisely, from analog on the fly without it being unbearable. Well, I don't think it would have even been possible, because we're like just talking in the middle of a thing, a hit or a floor tom or a kick drum that gets a little bit louder because it was raw and open. But that limiter kind of kept us in the ballpark, and then allowed the rest of the record to sound good and not have to do any screwing around with the bottom end at all, with the low end phase, nothing. If you put this record on, if your turntable's well set up, you can mute the one channel and you just hear bass, and mute the other channel and just hear drums.
Just so people know, so the vinyl record's going to be hard pan, but when we put this out digitally, we're going to make a mono version available as well.
Right. And
so do you have to tinker with that at all to make it make sense in a mono way?
Yeah, well, it's interesting. When we were doing the mastering part of this, all of our traditional sensibilities kind of don't apply anymore. It's like we're standing there listening to, is the bass louder or the drums are louder? Well, they're sort of both audible, but so we use the mono comparison as a kind of like, well, what does it sound like in mono? Do the drums do they sound like they're in proportion to one another? And then we open them back up again, and I decided that's kind of cool or not. But the answer to the question is, yeah, it's gonna need to be retweaked, I believe, because now they're gonna be stacked up in front of each other instead of.
You just want to charge us for an extra math. What was your
you raised the issue about opining on sort of creative choices which give you technical limitations. I noticed that over these so many years, you very rarely, if ever, express an opinion other than approval of music. But like you just described a situation where, especially given your role in the company and like how outlier a project it was, like you could have just said, hey, look, these guys sound good together, let's do it together. Does that ever cross your mind when you're working on stuff or art stuff?
He did suggest that. He certainly suggested soft pan.
Yeah, we really actually looked at all the different options. It wasn't until I hadn't exhausted all of my options to make the hard pan record work yet. If I had gotten to that point where I was really forced to to offer you the only option, if the only other option was to lower the level so much to make it kind of an unexciting and uninteresting sort of record, then that would be the compromise that I'd have to talk to you about. But more specifically, I consider myself to be the sort of unassigned producer for the producer. You know, I'm going to take whatever the record producer and producers want and try my best to produce that. And then, you know, kind of put up the guardrails where necessary, or put up the safety signs, the warning signs when you're getting too close. But it's generally not my job to judge. And I work in a really wide range of different styles of music. And so that same process works for a Lenny Kravitz record as it does a Donald Fagen record, and it does a Dave Matthews record or a JMI record. They've got their thing, so it's not really my job to figure out how to change it to make it great. It's how to accomplish what they want to accomplish. And vinyl has these physical limitations, and very diehard fans of digital will list them verbosely as to, you know, the reasons why they don't like vinyl, because of the interband distortion and because of this, that. But despite all of these negative things, we really enjoy listening to vinyl. We enjoy the experience of it. We like talking about it, sharing it, and
even looking at the cover art,
looking at the artwork. I know it's all
wonderful
part of it.
Three-dimensionality to it. It's kind of amazing.
I was going through my CD collection recently and just looking at all the covers and like, again, remembering what I didn't like about that little a Joel case thing, because it was just so
small.
So small.
Steve, I have a question. When you were coming up to this particular record that we're talking about, the hard pan drum and bass thing, did you hear the sound of this record in your head and chase it, or did you get in the studio with these artists and discover it together?
Well, if I'm not mistaken, we had done a record with each of them prior, solo record, a solo drum record with Mike Mitchell and a solo bass record with Max Girl. Mm-hmm. That Max record, though, was mostly upright bass and some electric pieces. This hard pan one is all electric. So I knew what the drums were going to sound like. And I knew what the electric bass was going to sound like. So I had some idea, I guess. But like Scott, I didn't know if it was going to work. Even prior to mastering, I was in the studio trying to make sure we had complete separation between the two instruments to begin with, mm-hmm. so that when you do just listen to one channel or the other, you don't hear any shadow or echo or anything of the other instrument. But then, you know, I checked with Scott before we did the session and said, this is what we want to do, but let's say we recorded hard pan, meaning, you know, on the 2-track tape, one instrument's on one side, one's on the other. Mm-hmm. Can we still change our mind when we come to mastering and make it a mono record or make it a soft pan record? Or so once he told us we could, then the pressure was kind of off. I said, let's record it the way that we're imagining it, and then if we want to change our mind, we still can later. I remember standing there with him in the control room, listening to them warm up, and we had the drums on one side and the bass on the other, or whatever, and we were like standing there wondering, like, is this something that is listenable even? Yeah. Is this something that people would want to hear? Is this something that makes sense? Is this dumb? You know, and we decided that, you know, it was different enough where it was exciting, even without the excitement of the actual players. And
speaking as somebody who has a long and storied career such as yourself, did you discover something new in this process that surprised you, something you didn't necessarily understand about music previously?
I don't know. I guess that it's possible to do this, you know, all the way through mastering and so forth. Are you worried about the test pressings not reacting the way your lacquer does or whatever?
It's the same issues that we have with all of them. You know, the nice thing about record making is once it's affixed in the master, once I get that groove made, it doesn't change.
Well, the material changes, though.
Well, there are subtle things, and certainly the surface noise changes the way things play back. And of course, ticks and pops and all this other stuff. There are plenty of mechanical changes, but the groove, the plating plants will call this a molecularly perfect copy. Like they're literally molding with metal ions, you know, a new groove that matches that previous groove precisely. That said,
You're very
we
worried,
hear
yeah.
defects all the time. It's not a perfect process, as much as they wanted to believe it is. But I'm not so much worried more about this record. I'm a little more worried about the consumer's playback equipment, because this is a challenging record to play back. So I'll go on record as saying, if it skips on your home player, check your turntable setup first before you email me or call JMI. It's a challenging record. It almost deserves a sticker, like on it, in that the groove is just jumping around all over the place. And one of the other things that's interesting is if your turntable's not quite set up properly and your playback cartridge is a little askew, there's an angle that your cartridge is supposed to be at, it won't cancel perfectly. You'll hear a little bit of drums in the bass channel and a little bass in the drums channel. That's a clue, listeners, that you need to get your cartridge readjusted.
Why don't you write a technical thing?
I was thinking the same thing, like a Strunk and White glossary of terms, just like, keep it real. Like
no, a disclaimer, sort of.
For a sticker, yes, we will put that sticker on.
An insert card that lets people.
Where he literally says, if you're saying playing right on your table, it's your table.
Actually, we don't need the card. We'll put it in the credits on the album. We'll
write something up that we can include.
One or two sentences.
It doesn't have to be, it's not our fault, it's yours. It's literally understand what it is that you bought. This is a challenge. This is almost as more challenging a record to play back than your test record that you bought to line up your turntable.
Well, I think I think offering instructions on how best to hear what the artists and producers intended is. I would love to find something like that in a record.
There's a long history of that too.
Super old school.
Where they say this record is best heard on a such and such type of
high as a kite.
Yeah.
Right. Absolutely. Well, that's implied with every record, especially jazz.
Sure, it's for me.
Record, yeah.
So what's next?
More, bigger, and better. So we are.
Well, that's like mine. Higher, faster, and louder. That's.
Well, I don't know about that, but now that we've sort of got our team in place, which currently expands and shuffles in and out of place, but we're happy where we are. We feel like we're set up to do more. Because mostly of Steve's reputation, and I like to think some of the awareness of the label, we've got much bigger artists, which translate to more commercial considerations, and
is it becoming harder to make those records or easier?
Harder because they're more expensive because of the level of fame of the people involved.
Okay.
But also potentially more
I feel
rewarding.
like they're still really wild. These are like wild and crazy, performances and captures of moments, lightning strikes kind of performances. So I think that's not getting watered down at all.
No, that's just our personalities, like input into the projects. Like always come with a sense of drama and a sense of different, and freedom, and then. Better. Thanks to you and thanks to our new pressing plant that we're using, I think our records are coming out even better now.
Yeah.
Shout out to Vinyl de Paris.
Yeah. Super happy
Patrick
with those
Sampson is our guy that hooks us up with the product and services there.
Yeah, but we don't really want to advertise for him because then he'll get busier and our stuff.
And I'm superstitious.
We'll send him this clip.
but yeah,
No, it's been a road. This isn't the first people that we've chosen to have you work on records. I'm not going to throw anybody under the bus at all, but because everybody tries really hard, it's just these are challenging projects.
And I'm happy with every record we have, and that's one of the biggest gratifications we have.
How big is your catalog these days?
We have 20.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, we just
finished projects, and then another few in various states of completion.
And this is since 2016. Is
2016,
that right? When you started the label?
17 was our first release.
Okay.
And then I think we did one a year for 3 years, and so you can see we've really accelerated to get to 20. And here's the thing: the more we do, the more money we lose. But
I thought you were going to say the better we get.
Oxymoronically,
depressing.
Oxymoronically, the more we enjoy it.
No, that's good. Well, good people. I mean, my arms aren't long enough to pat myself on the back, but good people that you enjoy working with. I really enjoy working with JMI, and always know I'm going to get a challenge when you guys show up with a couple boxes of tape.
We have another hard pan record that we're about to record, but it's piano and sax, so we should be more under
A
control.
different set of challenges, but
Yeah. How much did you have to lower the volume overall for hard pan
well,
one?
it's on the par of about a 23-minute side. So it's about 4 dB down from what like a 17 or 18-minute side would be, which sound, you know, it's not nothing. It's several dB down, but it's not really quiet. It's obviously not as loud as it can't be. The groove just physically won't let me make the groove any louder. And believe me,
what if we recorded? What if you print it to a 20-inch?
Oh, then I can make it. I just run out of real estate.
We have to invent a new turntable, get new.
And I need a thicker lacquer too.
Right,
I need one more.
All right, whatever you need.
Personally, I'm down to buy more gear. I'm happy to do it.
Shorter is better to an extent, but this record couldn't have been any louder even if it was shorter because I'm fitting the physical limitations of the groove depth and width.
So answering your question about what's next is really our biggest and most exciting project that's coming out, which is the Questlove, David Murray, Ray Angry Trio 4-platter box set. Have you done that one yet? I mean, have you? Yeah. You sent? Did you send? You sent it out?
That's out the door. Wow. We're waiting to get our test pressings back.
Wow.
It's probably it's only within the last few days. It's in the
so we had done a David Murray record before, but this was the first time Quest came on to JMI. So we're very excited about that. He's going to bring some more exposure to the label, and that project is like, it's hard to imagine us doing more after that. Yeah. He says more, bigger, better, but like, how do you get more, bigger, better than that? Yeah. It's like 3 of our favorites. You know, Ray's been on a bunch of our releases. It all tied together, and the music is, you know, it's like free jazz meets, you know, soul. I don't know.
I meant to say before we were talking about the hard pan record, and that how initially it kind of scrambles your brain when you're listening to it, and it actually took me a few listens to, you know, we were working on it for a while. Admittedly, I was still kind of confused. Then I played with it a bunch the whole next day, and suddenly like, oh yeah, I got this. It's like I suddenly was the aesthetic decisions about where the bass was supposed to be and how loud this was supposed to be and what the arc of the record was supposed to be all made sense. But it took some listening. You really.
And then the day of, we decided to switch both instruments. Then it really made sense.
And again, I mean, who'd figure? You know, we don't all have, you know, the same bilateral hearing or anything like that, but the 3 minds in the room all voted for the flip. And
why? What was behind the decision?
We still don't know.
It made us dizzy.
We still don't know.
It made us dizzy with the drums on the left.
That
and in some sense, that was completely instinctive. If you thought about bass instead of drums on the left, it suddenly made more sense. Like reading right to left to right, and so for me, that's what it was about.
I've had this experience with other clients' recordings, live in the studio recordings, where they do direct a 2-track, and then they get finished, and they're like, well, they'll ask me to flip the channels just to see if they like it better, and it's usually described as it changes the balances between the instruments. Like when it's flipped, the sax is louder. And I'm like, well, that doesn't make any frickin' sense, but it does. It's just, you know, we have to remember that our hearing is just an emotional reaction to the sound pressure that we're feeling, and our history, our experience being around music. So, like a drummer interprets sound from speakers differently than a bass player does. They're different than a guitarist do because their experience is, you know, from sitting behind the drums as opposed to being in front of them and stuff.
Sure.
So, you know, we can't discount the fact that we have an emotional reaction to it.
Hearing you talk about it makes me think maybe all those rock records, those Zeppelin and Beatles records that were mixed in stereo, like maybe the bass was more prominent in the left channel on most of those albums. So my brain has become accustomed to hearing. Who knows?
It could be anything like that. Or if you played in a combo and the bass player was
typically on the left. Yeah, actually makes sense.
Or if you're right-handed, you may. If you're right-handed, maybe you're right-eared also.
Yeah, dominant.
Yeah, and you want to hear the more powerful instrument on the right side. Like, we couldn't figure it out.
Yeah.
It's just one of those things.
But it felt right.
Yeah.
Well, the weird thing is, so we decided, okay, well, what the heck, let's switch the channels. Yeah. And we worked on it for an hour or so. And then for giggles, I just flipped it back. And I was like, wow, that feels wrong. Right? Now, Steve had the same reaction. So it was Now, who will agree with us on this are the live classical recording engineers and things like that that are crafting a reproduction of an acoustic space, you know, with intensive detail and orientation, and left and right matters absolutely. How it sounds reflecting off the different walls, but even more matter-of-factly, like, you know, where the cellos are and where the violins are.
Yeah, but if that was a live performance, you know, one guy is all the way over there next to the curtain, and the other guy's all the way over there next to the curtain.
Yeah, I guess it doesn't quite hold. But so there's, you know, maybe there is that black magic to mastering and mixing and record making.
It's a great record for sampling as well, because you can take from either by itself, you know, so there's a lot of good samples to be taken from that record.
It's really cool that you said that. I mean, a lot of great up-and-coming electronic producers are looking for, you know, something that normally wouldn't be found in the bins as you're in a record store, and providing new material for that community. It's just a whole other angle of what you guys are doing.
Yeah, well, we try to keep that in mind. A bunch of all of our solo records are great for sampling. Like the David Murray solo saxophone and bass clarinet record it's all samples. Yeah.
We've gone as far to pick one of our favorite producers on whom we want to work on our catalog to do stuff like that. But, you know, at a basic level, and this is kind of a wrap up on everything we do with Scott, is that trying to be as egoless as we can, which is not easy for me especially, it feels like what we're doing has artistic value beyond, you know, we're all very interested in records and sort of being music fans in a sense where it's more important in our lives than it might be to the typical person. And that sort of informs all this, but, and you know, the sampling aspect, but I think at its most basic level, it gives me for sure, and I hope Steve too, and Scott too, like a feeling that we're doing something which is culturally important. And I know that's a little judgmental as opposed to other sort of parts of the artistic record business, but that's sort of the raison d'etre for JMI.
And to live beyond us, you know, because all of my favorite music, everybody's dead. Who made that, who mastered it, who engineered it, who produced it, everybody's gone. You know, the record's still there. So it's hard to ignore that.
Actually, Jay, something you said just sparked in my mind. You know, as somebody who's been on both major and independent labels that I shall not mention and had weird experiences, the fact that you're coming at artist development and music development and production from such a creative standpoint, and you seem to be, from my perspective, taking such good care of your artists. It is actually a really beautiful thing, and it's what I guess I imagine record labels did in the past, cultivating artists, taking care of artists, looking out for their careers, seeing that they were, you know, that they were able to walk away with their artistic integrity. It's nice to see you guys, you know, bring that back to the music business.
Yeah, I'm really proud of that. I mean, and we look at these records, and every single one we've made, every single musician we've made, knock on wood, so far, has really shown us an appreciation, which makes us feel great in addition to the product.
Yeah, I mean, I wish we could do more helping out the artists and cultivating their careers and sending them on tours and, you know, having every department accounted for, you know, for each record. You know, we simply can't do that, but we do feel and get a lot of gratitude from the artists for the experience of the record or records that we do with them, and it's very exciting to know that we're giving some of who we know are going to be legends their first opportunity to do a record or a vinyl record or to do something, you know, completely analog. So. It's like I said earlier, it's really not worth doing, especially jazz, unless you're doing it the right way. You don't have to be pure about it. Certainly lots of great digital jazz records that are being made that sound, you know, if you told me this was analog, I'd be like, oh, okay, great, you know, it sounds great. But, you know, we know that we're keeping it as pure as possible and have the right motivations to help the artists and to help ourselves. You know, in jazz especially, the record label is a thing. It's part of the beauty the
Talk
release.
about your radio show for a second, because you may know as much about this stuff recently from your research as anybody. What do you do on the radio show?
It's either a 5 or a 3-hour show called Labeled on the Columbia University station WKCR, which has a great tradition in history and jazz. And we dedicate each show to one label. And we sort of talk, and what Steve was referring to is we found that almost without exception, the great labels like Blue Note, like Riverside, like Prestige, like ECM, they are all part of the great man theory. There's one or most 2 people who get together with a stupid, crazy dream, put their own money in, dedication, and depending on where commercial tastes are at the time, have varying levels of commercial success. They all, almost all of them ran their fortunes into the ground, but they all created, to some extent, these bodies of work in which the label owner, despite in many cases not making musical decisions, somehow leaves an indelible imprint on the entire catalog. Yeah. Whether it just be overall quality or types of musicians, types of music. And so we really delve into these labels from 360 degrees. The music, the cultural and historical forces that were happening when these records were being made, the technical aspects to the extent we can figure it out, and surprising ourselves by educating ourselves during the show, during the music. That's what the shows are about.
Yeah, the more we learn about these other labels and what they did right and wrong, we can apply that to us. But really, it's just fascinating because every label is a different story, different time period, and we do feel a connection because we're those current idiots who are.
Well, I was just going to say, you're the guys who are leaving your indelible mark on a catalog, and as you said before earlier, Jay, this is these records they're gonna outlive you, and they'll be here after we're all gone to represent what you were feeling.
Yeah,
one day someone will figure it out. They'll all be worth thousands of dollars, and they can bring the money to Stephen Mine's gravesite, please.
Just put a rose on that.
An expensive rose, please.
Well, let's wrap with that. But guys, this is tremendous. Love having you up, even when we're not mastering.
We're going to have you on Labeled at some point.
Yes.
Is there a jazz label that you are comprehensive on?
Well,
you need to talk about approximately.
I'm pretty comprehensive on John's Zodic label. That's a more current, modern jazz and avant-garde label, Zodic Records. But I'll think about that a little bit. CTI has always been kind of fascinating for me, just how incredibly pop they recorded those records. They're just. I get a fun little opportunity to do a presentation in front of an audience of audio engineers one year, and almost everyone was blasting how loud mastered music has gotten. Everything was crushed and distorted and blah, blah, blah. I can't stand it. And so I decided, let's compare apples with apples, or at least, a couple different types of apples. So I put on a Sting record that had been cut at Masterdisk, Fields of Gold, and played this, really pristine kind of thing. And I set the volume so that it could be heard. And beautiful wide stereo imaging. It sounded really, really good. And then I put on Stanley Turrentine, a Creed Taylor record, and the guys in the front row literally jumped because it was so freaking loud. The sax was right in your face. And so I stumbled. I had this record in my collection from when I was a kid and hadn't really noticed it, but I had noticed that I liked that it was emotionally very connected with that record, but it made even a bigger impact on the audience than I expected it to, because the difference in level was extreme. And then as I learned more about that label, I found out it was really something they just did. That was a.
So what are you saying? They just mastered loud?
Or they were cut loud, mastered loud. They obviously made that a priority.
Well, it's also, if you think about it, that was the end of 50 years of Rudy's experience in perfecting analog. And then right after CTI went out of business, he kind of switched over to digital hard and hated analog.
Well, there was an evolution of analog into digital where the producers at the time would say, this digital stuff, I've got to work completely differently. I do the mix that I'm used to doing, but it's not coming back the way I remember it. Hugh Padgett, Bob Claremont, and all these guys that would come into Masterdisk would say the same thing. They're literally struggling to make this new, better format sound right. And they obviously worked out techniques and processes that worked better. But now the same problem, you take those digital techniques and you try to record analog with them, they don't necessarily work right.
Not at all.
So are you able to do in this room, are you experimenting with direct to lathe?
Yeah, that was the original reason for putting it in here, was to do direct to disc, and I'm wired for it. We've done a few direct to disc cuts. You played on the first one.
I was the bass player on the very first test.
Yeah, they actually signed the lacquer. So it can be done.
So you're just recording in real time. Like if there's a 15-minute performance, you got a 15-minute
scratching right into the disc. It's fabulous.
Everything, and it's
so it's only a singles technology. Really.
Well, what ends up happening is, from a practical standpoint, the chances of that perfect performance being perfectly mixed and being perfectly cut, and then being handled properly by the courier, being handled properly in plating, getting a perfect test pressing back, and not being damaged in shipping, it got to be so frustrating. That just the thought of trying to pull that off on an album format became nearly impossible. I see you laughing because we get up to the test pressing process, and then we sometimes have to iterate that 3 or 4 times with cutting and new test pressings and cutting and new test pressings. Direct to disc, you only have one lacquer. Wow. Back in the days of Doug Sachs and Bernie Grumman's studios, where they would do direct to disc, they'd have multiple lathes set up, and so they could cut 2 or 3, even 4 discs at a time.
Wow.
Which would definitely help the commercially if one the stylus broke off while that was cutting.
You had those 4 lathe machines. You got rid of 3 of them.
What about direct to metal mastering? Whatever happened to that, or what was that?
Oh, DMM. Kind of a funny twist. The lathe that I kept was the latest generation of the Masterdisk lathes was originally a direct metal mastering lathe, the DMM lathe, and we converted it back to lacquer because there was more call for it.
That's not what we're talking about. That's mastering straight to the
That's
the
from
mother.
whatever format recordings, digital or analog recording, cutting onto a copper disc. Direct to metal mastering is cutting onto a copper disc. It can be done direct. It can be done live, but it's usually done from digital files.
You can cut to copper on there?
You used to. We converted that lathe, but it's. I don't want to betray the technology too much. And in other words, there are some really good aspects about direct to metal mastering.
Do you understand what we're talking
DMM.
about?
Yes. But there are some limitations that bother me more. So from a compromise standpoint, I'm heavily leaning towards lacquer. Coincidentally, that's the lathe that I have to cut on. But my point is, where you benefit in DMM is on really short runs, where you're only going to maybe do 1 pressing run of less than 1,000, less than a few hundred even, and on long programs that are quiet. Like if you wanted to squeeze 28 to 30 minutes on the side of a record, you probably should try to talk about cutting the DMM, because they can make the grooves smaller and they can shove the grooves closer together than we can on lacquer. And the plating process is a little simpler. There's two less steps in the plating process, because that thing you cut becomes your mother, and then you can pull stampers off of that. So it's
people still doing this?
I'm not doing it. It's almost only place presently. There's a couple of places in Germany. There's one in the Czech Republic that does a lot of the records that are being made by small and medium-sized labels right now are being done through this DMM process, though they're just not really talking about it that much. The big provider in the Czech Republic has both lacquer and DMM lathes, but I think they prefer. I shouldn't speak for them. I don't know what the reasoning is, but a lot of those projects come out on DMM, and my complaint with them is the DMM records aren't as loud. So they have lower noise floor, so they have the potential to be better hi-fi records, but you can't cut as loud with them, and you don't get quite the sound of the analog process with them. It wouldn't be it wouldn't be my suggestion for your records because
Because you don't have that machine, I get it.
We weren't thinking about it.
It's sort of, it was an attempt of the production process at the time to sort of digify the analog process, so to get longer sides, because CD were capable of putting 75 minutes on a side on a CD.
Wow.
So there was pressure to be able to cut 30-minute sides,
Wow.
or 35-minute sides, and so they made this technology which.
I like that you're skipping a couple steps in the plating though, because doesn't plating just sound like that's where problems are going to happen?
It definitely can, but the process really has to be perfect, or you pick up ticks and pops and noises and things. But there's you know, when it's right, it's supposed to be a replication, but you know, we really, yes, there is an advantage on the long sides and on the records that don't have. Oh, there's a couple other things. I have to send you my blog on DMM versus lacquer, because I have my podcast on that.
Please don't.
Because there's a couple other details about. Well, you certainly couldn't do a hard pan record on it because I just can't cut deep enough.
Yeah, but you said we couldn't do the first one. So,
Stand
Challenge
corrected.
accepted.
glad to stand corrected.
All right.
All right, folks, this has been Making Music at Masterdisk. I'm Scott Hall. Join us next time, and thanks for watching.
good show.
Yeah, man.
Very fun. Thank you, Scott.